When I first heard about Tinykin, it sounded like a Pikmin clone. When I saw its art style, I was expecting a Paper Mario experience. Tinykin certainly draws inspiration from a variety of classic games, but at its core, it's a 3D Collectathon platformer. Tinykin does a good job at avoiding many of the pitfalls that some of its genre-defining predecessors fell into nearly 2 decades ago. And while its simplicity and shortcomings keep it from reaching the heights of the genre a la Mario Odyssey, Tinykin left me eager for my next session throughout the roughly 7 hours it had to offer. You play as Milo, an archaeologist from the planet Aegis who is dead set on finding where humans came from. Through his research, Milo comes across an ancient human signal emanating from a planet in a nearby galaxy and teleports to it. When Milo regains consciousness, not only does he find that he's been shrunken to the size of a quarter, but he's stranded in a 90s era's house inhabited by insects and the Tinykin, a race of spherical minions who respond to his commands. Early on, Milo's goal becomes clear. Collect 6 items to reassemble a legendary machine that will get him home. Aside from the first item, which Milo obtains during the tutorial, these items are located in the house's various rooms, each of which makes up the game's levels. Each level is a different room you'd find in a house, like a living room or a bathroom. They're filled with tons of nooks and crannies to explore, but never seem overwhelming. Despite being visually unique, their layouts tend to get a bit repetitive. In general, the rooms have a center focal point surrounded by a perimeter of various towers made of desks, fridges, and other household objects. Many of these items are static platforms for Milo to traverse, so although they're visually unique, their functions are, for the most part, interchangeable with one another. But while rare, the small touches, like the xylophone staircase playing a different note on each step, do help make the house feel more alive. The levels are quite large considering how tiny you are, but are easy to navigate and backtrack because of the distinct objects making up the terrain in each level. I mean, how many times have you climbed up a cat tower that doubles as a restaurant for ants? You'll be spending plenty of time exploring, so thankfully each room boasts its own wonderful soundtrack that dynamically changes as you explore different parts of each level. Enter a piano and the living room's theme turns into a slower piano rendition. Then jump into a guitar, and that same theme seamlessly becomes an upbeat acoustic guitar performance. There's so many small design elements that, in the aggregate, really make the house feel lively and worth exploring. But what really gives the house its energy is its inhabitants. While the story itself is nothing to write home about, the cast of bug characters you meet makes the game shine. The writing in this game is really, really funny. It doesn't take itself too seriously and makes every bug worth talking to. There are an abundance of pop culture references and subplots from recurring characters that kept me seeking out conversations throughout the house. And it might just be nostalgia, but the Banjo-Kazooie style voice acting nails what I'm looking for in a game like this, showing just enough of the bugs' personalities without the big budget a voice acting cast would command. From its advertising, the marquee mechanics seem to be its Pikmin-like creature and namesake, the Tinykin. But in reality, the Tinykin often feel more like an afterthought. Each color of Tinykin has a different power, but none of them are particularly satisfying. Even the best Tinykin becomes tedious after the first few uses. Controlling them is simple, maybe too simple. They're almost all bound to the same button, and the appropriate Tinykin is thrown based on whatever you have targeted in your crosshairs. And there aren't really any novel ways the Tinykin get used. You more or less do the same thing with each Tinykin in every level. The freshness of the new abilities, especially in the latter half of the game, wears off quickly, and becomes more tedious than anything else. Still, it's pretty cute to turn the camera around and see an army of Tinykin marching behind you, although it did lead me to some frame rate drops when there were an overwhelming number on the screen at once. The game's focus is really on its platforming. It's nothing earth-shattering, but it helps promote exploration. Milo's movement is responsive and very, very simple. He moves and he jumps. You begin with a bubble jump that allows you to momentarily float, and after the tutorial, you get Milo's soapboard, a skateboard that you can use to quickly move around, grinding silk strings and ledges. Alongside the periodic backtracking mechanisms you unlock to make sure that you don't have to scale the leaves of a potted plant each time you want to revisit the flowery peak, these traversal tools make platforming in Tinykin very forgiving, which encourages you to seek out all the house has to offer. Speaking of being forgiving, there are very few ways to die in this game. There are no enemies, and aside from a few environmental hazards, there isn't much to worry about. This might make for too simple a game for some, but for me, it was a great way to relax, platform, explore the house, and collect all the items the house had hidden. And despite taking place in a house, the Collectathon never felt like a chore. The main collectible is pollen, and collecting it actually serves a purpose. Milo can trade in pollen to lengthen the amount of time he can float with his bubble jump. Aside from that, Milo can help various bugs out on side quests that are pretty endearing. Completing these quests rewards Milo with an artifact, each of which has a cute blurb of lore about the house. You run into both pollen and artifacts pretty naturally as you explore the house, so I never felt like I had to go far out of my way scouring for every last item. Where Tinykin suffers the most is its gameplay loop. Each level at its core follows the same routine. Explore, gather Tinykin, and find items A, B, and C to solve whatever issue the room's bug colony is facing. While this is fun at first, the game effectively turns into a marching simulator as you watch your Tinykin carry things from point to point. And boy, do you watch them carry things. There's often nothing you can do when the Tinykin are moving items because they get stuck behind countless roadblocks that require your intervention at multiple points along their path. In some of the later levels, it felt like I spent more time waiting for them to finish marching than I did exploring the environment or really anything else. But by the time the enticement of exploration began to fade and I became worried that I'd soon grow tired of the game itself, the credits rolled. And boy, do I love a game that knows when to call it quits and doesn't overstay its welcome. Overall, Tinykin was a fun experience and I would recommend this game. If you're a fan of Collectathons, this is definitely worth the short amount of time to scratch that itch. And as of recording, the game is on Game Pass, so if you have that, it's definitely worth a try, even if you aren't as crazy about the genre as I am. If neither of these apply to you, maybe wait for the $25 price tag to come down.